You heard it right here, right now from the beat.
The new ivory is mammoth.
What do you guys want to know? I've done way too much research on dinosaurs.
Almost a larger-than-life figure.
No reason at all to think it was made by aliens.
Drop down and go swimming as fast as you can. Out of whale.
All these big giants give me a kiss and tell me they don't.
The crowd, just the pop, the loudness, the excitement, the electricity. I don't know if I can take your little Canadian destroyer.
Future is scary, but it's also wonderful.
Welcome to the Unscriptify podcast powered by Jägermeister and get ready to dive deep into fascinating world of comics and storytelling. Today we have the privilege to sit down with Eisner-winning comic book writer Matt Fraction. From Iron Man to sex criminals, he wrote and created triumphs and falls of our favorite superheroes. Without further ado, Matt, are you ready to go genuine, uncensored, and unscripted with us today?
I'm ready, yes. I'm good. How are you?
Great. It's a privilege to be here with you today as your fan and as a podcast host as well. And before most, if not every comic book writer, there was a comic book fan first. What is the first comic you remember picking up, and did it take you on this writing journey or not?
Yeah, the first comic I remember was Batman 316. Which was a Batman and Robin fighting a guy called Crazy Quilt. It is completely bonkers. I've gone back and I've reread it. It's just completely nuts. And yeah, it clearly did something for me. I was a inveterate doodler and artist when I was a kid, and sort of drew constantly, and something about finding comics and the way that they tell stories with words and pictures was just a thing that made sense to me, and it's the thing that I responded to and enjoyed kind of profoundly, and yeah, it's set me on the path to where I am today. I'm sure.
Is there maybe lingering wish to write Batman and Robin comic book?
Not terribly. I mean, I've got to do. I did a short for Detective Comics a while back, and got to do some Batman showing up in my Jimmy Olsen run that I did with Steve Lieber. But I mean, it's Batman, so probably somewhere. I don't know that I have anything in me at the moment, but it's Batman. Sure, who couldn't tell a story or two about Batman? I guess.
Yeah, it's probably like a Mount Rushmore of comic books.
Yeah, and if it feels nice, I got to do it a little bit. So if it never happens again, I'll die happy. I'll be okay. I won't feel like I never got to do it, but
It's like getting a James Bond role for actors. You shouldn't turn it down.
Yeah. I'd be happy to be a henchman that gets, shot and falls off a gangplank. Just to be a part of it was fun.
Yeah. Well, speaking about things you did, one of your most popular and most beloved storyline is Hawkeye. My Life as a Weapon. For majority, Clint Barton is not one of the go-to heroes they would pick from the shelf, but I always loved his character, especially as down-to-earth guy, this mortal among men. And how do you see Hawkeye? And do you think that this down-to-earth approach in your particular storyline influenced his popularity among readers and fans alike?
That's exactly what I liked about him. Mark Grunwald did a Hawkeye limited series in I don't know, maybe 1984. And at the end he sort of he damaged his hearing deliberately. So I can't remember who the bad guy was, but there's some kind of mind control thing happening, and he deafened himself so he wouldn't hear it. And that was how he managed to save the day. But then the next month in Avengers, there was a whole storyline, a whole issue where the Avengers were going to go on late night with David Letterman. It's a talk show, a comedy chat show out here, and his hearing was still damaged, and the whole issue he was obsessed with trying to get everything, all of Dave's questions ahead of time. And he was worried that Dave was a comedian. He was going to improv, and if he improved and threw a curveball, Hawkeye wouldn't be able to hear it, and everybody would know he was hiding his deafness, and he wouldn't get to be an Avenger anymore. You know, and it was like the first time I had seen a comic character sustain an injury that wasn't better the next month.
Mm.
You know, it didn't just go away the next month. It's like, oh well, good thing I survived that exploding building or whatever. He was beat up, and he literally got so in his head, worried about it, he got lost in the Avengers mansion. You know, like he was so like anxious and that I don't know. I just all of that spoke to me, and you know, the arrows are amazing. Like that was always the trick arrows and all that stuff. So yeah, that was exactly the thing I liked. Is like, why does this normal guy get to stand next to Iron Man and Captain America and Thor? So it was certainly the thing about the character that interested me that I wanted to talk about. And I mean, it seems to have resonated with people. You know, that sort of what makes an Avenger, what makes a hero isn't the superpowers or the, you know, being a Norse god, but you know, it's something internal and fragile. And I love that as a kid, it affected me as a kid, and that it found resonance with people, you know, who if I knew what it was about that book that people responded to that made it successful, I would, you know, do it all the time, every time. But we were lucky, right place, right time, and it found an audience, which I'm eternally grateful for.
Yeah, but part of the reason that Hawkeye had such impact is maybe also additional personal touch you gave it, because if I'm correct, Hawkeye is influenced by your own experience living in Brooklyn. If that's true, what's the part of the Hawkeye story that's most similar to your own story?
I never lived in Brooklyn, but it's certainly you know, it certainly was influenced by life in cities as I experienced it. Then, you know, I had lived in New York a little bit. I lived in Chicago, and this sort of, you know, I wanted to tell us, you know, I was really interested in his world. I was really interested in where he went to go do his laundry, you know, and that meant different types of people and ethnicities and all of it coming together. And I was affected by a thing that a friend of mine who actually did live in Brooklyn said. There was a blackout in New York a few years after 9/11. And we were talking about it, and he said something really interesting. He said that it was the best parts of 9/11. Like it was, everybody brought their food out onto the streets and fired up grills and were cooking for each other and hanging out together, and it's sort of like the whole city became like a block party. And he just sort of lived, like, even though he had lived in his apartment at that point for like 20 years or whatever, but he was meeting neighbors he never knew he had, and all that kind of stuff. And it just sort of brought that you know, that just struck me of something about the character of people. I mean, of New York for sure. But the thing of common cause really is important to me. It's a thing that I think, you know, keeps me from despair a lot of time. You know, this belief that innately, I think, you know, we all know we're in this together, you know. And that felt like the kind of world that would inform and inspire a guy who could blow his hearing out and still try to be an Avenger, you know.
Yeah, and I think also with the audience, I think there was that I think audience shifted and they wanted more of that ground level characters, you know. And I saw that kind of in films also, because Daredevil TV series was hugely successful, and you know, it also kind of dealt with that, you know. It dealt with the themes of the ordinary, almost people caught up in the superhero world and things like that. And even in Batman versus Superman, there is also kind of that theme of Bruce Wayne looking at the sky and
Right.
seeing Superman.
Right.
It's just like he's so godly and they're so up, and we almost can't
Right.
touch them, but we are
Yeah.
real in this world.
You know, and I think there's something innate in DC versus Marvel, for lack of a better word, where the DC characters are all these kind of godlike heroes. They're kings or queens or Superman or billionaires. And they're all sort of up here looking down. And you know, the DC in its Silver Age was fueled by science fiction writers and pulp writers, and that was very much
Yeah.
the perspective at the time. And Marvel characters then, and you know, the early '60s were all on the ground looking up. You know, it was
Mm.
Peter Parker. Yeah, I'm Spider-Man, but I really need to get this job to. I need $25 to buy my aunt's medicine, and then I have to get out to Queens to get it to her. You know, it was the
Everyman
Fantastic
character.
Four. Yeah, you know, that sort of thing. And I think there's just something about Hawkeye, especially, that is like the perfect Marvel character. There are no powers. There's just hard work.
Mhm.
You know, talent for sure, but also like willpower and hard work. And that just that I think, yeah, I think it was a time when that was the other thing. When I pitched the book, everything that was kind of going on, and like, you know, I had just done these, I'd done a big crossover event, I'd done Thor, I'd done Iron Man, all these kind of giant heroes, the chance to do these small intimate stories. And you know, with only a couple of exceptions, all of the Hawkeye issues that we did were all kind of self-contained.
Yeah.
You know, you didn't need to. There was one two-parter, or there are two two-parters. Other than that, they were all kind of standalone. Every issue had a beginning and a middle and an end. And yes, there were things that were, you know, stories that were kind of accruing over the span of the run, but it was designed to be, all right, in this issue, he just needs to buy a roll of Scotch tape. You know, this issue, he's just trying to get a dog to the vet. This issue, you know, it's that kind of very small little things, and um, maybe it was just different than what was going on at the time, you know, and maybe that just kind of struck a chord because so much of everything had just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, and I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it seems always when you and Aya, if I'm pronouncing the name right, team up with something revolutionary. You changed Iron Fist suit to suit the time. You incorporated ASL into comics, silent chapter of Hawkeye, and truly unique visual concept in Hawkeye. How does your
Yeah.
collaborative process with Aya look like? Because the readers think you are making magic, apparently.
Right. Well, so do I. And he's a genius and a madman. And the best thing about Iron Fist was, I mean, aside from, you know, I got to work with Ed, who is, you know, one of my dearest friends, and then I got to be very close with David. And there's I think it's maybe the second or the third issue of Iron Fist. There was a page that was scripted, and Iron Fist was going to be on the rooftop of a building and fight some guys and then get moving again. It's just kind of like a little page as he's kind of monologuing, you know. And David wrote me and Ed and said, "Look, I know what you guys want with this page. Can I try something? And I know where it starts and I know where it ends, but I want to do a thing." And we we're like, "Yeah, sure, go nuts." And he did a drawing where the building was all sort of one image divided into panels with Iron Fist kind of moving through it, so that the background was one congruent image cut up into panels or whatever. And it was great. And he sort of went here and he went there and he looped around and then he kind of ran off at the end. And I just remember thinking, like, I couldn't write that. It was such a cool effect. It was such a cool, you can only do this in comics kind of thing. And it's like, oh, I don't know how to script that. I don't know how to.
Yeah.
So, a lot of Hawkeye, you know, it was a lot of trust and a lot of communication between us. And, you know, when I wrote Hawkeye, I would frequently write what's called Marvel style or plot style scripts, I mean, they're very elaborate. It's not like, oh, okay, he fights a guy. It wasn't like that. Wouldn't be a script page, but like there's a scene with Clint and Penny when they're in a kitchen, and it was like a 2-page scene, and I wrote the script. It was like the start of this, they're as far apart as they can possibly be, and at the end they're about to kiss. And here's the dialogue, and sort of wrote it like a play. And David broke that out on his own and stuff like that. We worked on a chapter of Brian Bendis's Words for Pictures book, sort of about writing comics, where but it sort of shows a lot of the process. But as David would say, well, to really tell that story of how we work together, you'd have to show all the drafts of the scripts and all of his kind of drawings and all, and then how I like he letters on the page. Like he'll do his kind of layout for a page, and then he'll letter it, and he'll send it back to me and be like, all right, you got too much shit, you got to clear this up, or here's what it looks like, and I would then rewrite to those balloons and make, all right, well, that sentence needs to be smaller, or this, we can get rid of this one, and all that kind of stuff. But David says, like, really, you need to include like all the 480 emails that go back and forth between us, because there's a lot of just constant back and forth. It's as close, it's when I started writing comics with the goal of like, I want to do this, like I want to do this and get good at it. I met a guy named Steven Sanders, who's a fantastic artist. We did a graphic novel called Five Fists of Science together. We were both students at the same school. He was in the illustration department, and he had a show, and I remember seeing his work and thinking, I bet that guy wants to do comics. We had a mutual friend. The mutual friend put us in touch, and Steven and I got together and decided, yeah, let's try making comics. And we would go to a coffee shop, and I would sit across from him and write for him, and he would start to kind of draw, and we would just spend hours together working like that. It is sort of, it felt like the maybe the comic book equivalent of being in a garage band, of just noodling around and figuring out how it's going to work, but it was so beneficial to me to see how an artist thinks, and okay, that's a huge piece of text I just wrote, so that looks like a floating paragraph. So that it was, so there's a lot of back and forth and a lot of trust and a lot of I don't know what that game is called, where you're, but it's just a lot of that, it's a very yes and.
Yeah, it's funny because your younger colleague Rem V also talked about collaboration between artists and writers being in a band.
Yeah.
And
I think we're coming. I mean, hopefully we're coming through it. I mean, I think comics are in a kind of a quiet place right now. But I think we've been in such a writer-driven moment for so long, that a lot of comics, I think, just quite frankly feel and look, more importantly, they look overwritten. If you open your eyes, you open a comic and kind of blur your eyes. If you see more white blobs with black bricks of text than you do art, like that's not a great comic, So I think writers everywhere need to learn how to be more collaborative and more trusting with artists. It's just going to increase the visual firepower that happens. I've never wanted employees. I want collaborators. I want co-conspirators.
There are no rules but one. Drink Jägermeister at -18 degrees Celsius.
I just wanted to follow up on what you were saying about comics being overwritten, because I think the art, obviously comics are visual art before everything, but I think also for someone to start reading a comic, it's the art that's going to get him there to open, because I can't count on how many times I was scrolling on Pinterest or Instagram and I see some cool art from comic or manga, and I was like, oh, this looks interesting, I need to check this out, and that's I think that's why the art is, obviously people have different tastes in art, But if you can that make it eye-catching, people are gonna open the comic, and that's where it starts.
It was certainly true for me, and I think we all sort of view things through our own kind of lens of experience, but it was certainly the my case.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Also,
I would rather spend the time trying to find the right 3 words than the close enough 30 words,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Less is more.
Yeah, it's harder too. Less is hard.
Yeah. You spoke about too much words, making a comic less compelling, and that's my biggest problem maybe with one of the comics which is regarded as the best of all time, Dark Knight Returns, which is one of the worst I have ever read. So that's
Huh.
where I connect.
Right, interesting. I think it's such a dense read, visually too. It's sort of working in that 16 kind of panel grid and all that. It's interesting. It's never been a thing that's occurred to me about Dark Knight. But also, yeah.
I also kind of don't like it. But for example, Frank Miller also wrote Year One, and I think that's phenomenal. And
Yeah.
those are 2 different takes on Batman. But I, for example,
Yeah.
think Year One is phenomenal. I love it.
Yeah.
I love the
Huh.
art in it. But Dark Knight Returns is just too heavy for me. I don't know.
Wow. Huh. That's I think my age is showing, that's sacrilege in some comic shops I spent a lot of time in. So interesting. It's like
Yeah.
finding people that are like, yeah, no, Watchmen I'm not so into. I'm like, you're not allowed to say that, even if it's true. Right? But
Yeah,
anyway.
well, you're speaking with a couple of guys who, for entire childhood, didn't have comic book shop in the whole nation. So
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we're a different
And,
breed.
yeah, sure. Yeah.
yeah, go on. You want to say something?
No, I'm just thinking about it. That's
Mm.
interesting. Yeah.
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 Well, tell me, you were heavily tied to the production of Hawkeye series as well. Did it meet or even exceeded your expectations? And is there something that you would do entirely different? It was up to you.
I don't know that I would say that I was heavily tied. I was what was called a consulting producer. So like I spent the day in the writer's room, and then they would kind of send me scripts to read and offer notes. And some of the notes they'd listen to, and some they wouldn't. I was just kind of an early audience for it,
Yeah.
all of it exceeded my expectations. It was so deeply surreal, the entire experience, and the show premiered while I was in the writer's room for Monarch season 1, which is a sort of Godzilla show that co-created and executive produced on Apple TV, and had this kind of experience of going from like spending a day writing in the Godzilla room to going to Hollywood, where there was a purple carpet event, and they had Christmas trees and Christmas lights and snow machines, and and there was Hawkeye art all up and down. It was all of it exceeded expectations. Let's see, what would I do different? I put together a playlist of David and I were both making playlists while we were working on the book.
Oh,
And
I heard that.
and I sent a playlist to them. I was like, oh, here are all the songs that I was writing to. When I hear these songs, I think about something from Hawkeye. So that would be I would have I had more music cues and music licensing. But that's just my own experience of those stories, was what music was playing. There's still a lot of music in the show, so it was pretty great.
Yeah. And which songs did you put on your playlist? Because I didn't have a chance to see the playlist actually.
Oh boy. It's a long one.
Just a few.
There's a Underdog by Stevie Wonder. New York's All Right if you like saxophones by Fear. Um, uh, uh, Christmas Baby Please Come Home by Darlene Love. Those are the three that pop to mind right off the top. David's had a lot of like Lalo Schifrin music and instrumental tracks and stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah,
That's
it would have
cool.
been great to get all that stuff in a Disney show. Would have been pretty fun. But no complaints, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it was after Loki, it's probably the best that Disney Plus, at least for Marvel, put out, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Oh,
definitely.
yeah, very kind. There are a lot of smart, really talented people that worked on it,
Mhm.
and it's
Yeah.
crazy that like they really made it. They really steered into the Christmas stuff. Like it gets they re-show it every Christmas. You know, they like re-promote it every Christmas. It was crazy. It's crazy enough to feel like be a part of, you know, something this kind of juggernaut like the MCU, but then to be a part of the Disney Christmas entertainment universe is like,
Mm.
oh wow, this is going to play forever.
Yeah.
Only remarks I have about it is because Spider-Man No Way Home trailer came out
Mhm.
around that time, and
Yeah.
Spider-Man was swinging around Rockefeller Plaza. There was a Christmas tree
Yeah.
already lighting up, and he didn't show up in the finale. That was the finale. That
Yeah,
was
yeah.
disappointing.
Yeah.
That's good. It would be a cool touch, but they didn't miss him actually when you look back at it.
And they actually shot there too. That was the crazy part. Was they shot? I was stunned that they you know, and part of it was that COVID was still happening, so it was possible. So much of the city was still kind of quasi locked down, but they shot a lot in New York, which was pretty great.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, and also think about Hawkeye with that theme of Christmas. It felt, and he had that message of kind of
Die
Hawkeye
Hard.
being, yeah, Die Hard. He had that message of family being together and separate and on and on. And, you know, that kind of fitted that message more.
Yeah. It worked. It was tonally appropriate, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And who
And,
hasn't related to you just want to get home for Christmas and there's 10,000 things you got to do first.
Oh yeah.
Unfortunately, for other MCU shows, there weren't much relatable stuff.
I haven't had a chance to see too many of them, honestly, the last couple years of
Have you
my life.
watched Moon Knight, maybe?
I saw, yeah. Yeah, I think I got all I think I saw all of Moon Knight. Which
What
I
did
liked
you
it.
think of it?
I thought Oscar Isaacs was great. I thought it was a great
Yeah.
I hope they go back and do more. It was such such a fun, crazy character. It feels like they kind of only just barely got to scratch the surface of where they can go with it, you know?
I think that season 2 is confirmed, but for
Oh,
me,
great.
it kind of took a wrong turn somewhere around episode 3 or 4, where they went from this more psychosocial angle of his split personality to big monsters or gods in this case fighting in the finale. And
Yeah,
that
I think
was, go on.
no. I think that was
Yeah, I think it was
like quite the span of, you know, it started so small and then just
Yeah.
you know, sort of big kaiju gods fighting in the desert.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. I don't see the need why every show has to turn into some spectacle fight between gods, because if everything is so big, crucial, catastrophic, then it doesn't make sense if it happens every time.
Yeah, which I think is certainly true of comics too. You know, like if every story is about the world ending, none of the stories are about the world ending, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we spoke to Mark Wolfman, and you know, he obviously worked on one of the most famous ones, the Infinite Crisis, and we talked about how there is in comics now you have to There's almost like a rule to a yearly one or two times do this big event where world is ending and there's ton of things at stake. But it's just like it's mandatory. There's no story need for it.
Right. You know, I know that part of it is sales driven, you know, that people show up for those big stories.
Yeah,
I mean, you know, I think it's interesting, sort of the like the blessing and the curse of Crisis is that I mean, Crisis kind of did scale in a way that it kind of never really been done for that sustained amount of time. You talk about dense reads, right? Crisis is you know, but so much about Crisis was like it was a DC comic about other DC comics. You know, so much of Crisis was like predicated on knowing a lot about what was going on all over DC.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, then I think the kind of wrong lesson to take from it is so often these crossover events are about continuity or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah,
like,
and
no, please.
Yeah, and Marv is a big opponent of continuity in comics. On the other hand,
Yeah, and you know, I think that there's need and virtue, but when comics become so self-referential, I mean, I remember coming into finding my first direct market comic store right after Crisis and being really lost, because so much of what DC was doing was based on you have to understand what it was like before, you know, and I didn't have any of that, you know.
And Marvel has something similar right now, because if you wind up into some big crossover, you have to read this tie-in, that tie-in, this spin-off, this solo series. And was it the case when you started writing Fear Itself, which I consider to be also great comic?
Oh, thank you. You know, it's funny. I tried to do, whether or not it was successful is really not for me to say, I guess. But I wanted to. I tried to leave a lot of red meat on the table for everybody else. You know, remember like I came into Marvel in the middle of Civil War, and there was a scene in like my second issue of Punisher where the characters in the scene were changed like 5 times because of all the various different crossovers and things. And by the end, like I don't even remember who's in the scene, but it makes no sense that these like 4 characters are all in a room together. But it was like these are literally the only 4 characters that aren't somewhere else at this moment. So like, all right, great. So we're kind of planning Fear Itself, like trying to leave big pieces of, well, what happened to that one? Like somebody else can tell that story, you know. Let's you know. So it wasn't all a matter. I didn't want to take all of the big moments, you know, for Fear Itself. And like, look, I was doing Fear Itself and didn't tie my own book into it, you know. It's like I opted out of my own crossover and at one point, you know, so I don't know that it was entirely successful, but yeah, I think that's a real, and like comics are too expensive and too small. They, you know, they need to be like $2.25. Like just to keep up with inflation, with like from where things were when I started reading to now. Like 75 cents is like $2.25. Like that's like, so we're asking people to pay $4, $5 more for 20-page stories in a world where you've got streaming everything and video games. It's like part of our problem is it's just economically we're upside down. You know, like we're asking people to pay too high a price for too small a package. So I don't know. So I really just wanted, I'm very concerned about making sure readers get bang for their buck, you know? And again, I don't think I'm always successful at it, but it's always in my head. I'm always aware of like, God damn, these things are expensive. You know, I'm not so far away from that time in my life of like, you know, living in Chicago and like digging through couch cushions for change, you know, and that making the difference between what I was able to get at a comic shop or not, you know?
Yeah, yeah. But like we mentioned before, we don't have comic book stores. We even don't have it now. We have bookstores which have graphic novels, which consist
Yeah.
of multiple issues. But the first single issue that of course, we were reading it online, but I was always upset with Stan Lee's quote, I love boobs on screen, but I love them in my hands more. And
Yeah.
the first issue I had in my hands, I had to order it on eBay from the United Kingdom. It took 1 month to arrive to Montenegro.
Yeah.
And it was $5 10 years ago. It was Venom's storyline. I
Yeah.
don't know which one. Right.
But you know, I think you know, people like us who go to the shop every Wednesday, like it's always the physical component. Like digital's great, and
Yeah.
you know, I think digital has put comics in the hands, quote unquote, of a whole new generation of readers, and I think that's fantastic. I think it's remarkable, but I think it's never gonna break away from the physical artifact. I think the physical artifact is really important, but economically, I really struggle with how comics make sense right now economically.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also when you have something in, at least for me, in this world, physical, I am more attached to it, and I will not drop it. Because if I read a book on PDF, I will never finish that book. But if I
Right.
have it here on my desk, I will always see it, and I will always finish it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think too that if people encounter a book digitally that they like, they will seek out the physical copy later.
I do so.
You know, but yeah, it's almost cheaper to buy collections of stories now than it is to buy the individual issues, you know, and that's a problem.
Yeah. I also switched to buying volumes because it's more comfortable here.
Yeah,
And
let me show you one that you have to have.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
You need to have this one. You
Right.
can't have this on screen. This is just,
Right.
you know.
They did a black and white version in one of the absolute editions that's really terrific too. I love David Lloyd's art, and seeing it in black and white is really, really spectacular.
Yeah. This is what I consider a perfect comic book, in my opinion.
Okay. You know, I have some scripts from the early chapters, you know, when it was still being serialized in Warrior.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That I guess a friend of mine in Wales, when he would go to conventions in the 80s, when sort of it was breaking, Des Skin would sell Xeroxes of the original scripts. So I have a couple of early Alan Moore scripts from V for Vendetta, and a couple from Marvel Man, and he doesn't indicate page breaks. It's just like panel 1, panel 2, panel 3, panel 4, panel 90, panel 91, panel 92, panel 93, which is kind of fascinating. That he didn't. I don't know what point in his career he began to indicate page breaks, but he wasn't doing it for Warrior. That sort of the pagination of the stories was kind of planned by David Lloyd. It's really interesting.
Well, he's a unique writer, to be fair.
Yeah. But it's like finding out that, like, you talk about bands. It's like, oh yeah, no, they don't have a drummer or whatever. Like, oh, it seems like such a fundamental tool of a writer in comics that look, Alan Moore, it worked out okay, but I would love to know when he started to indicate where the page breaks come,
But do you think that maybe it was even liberating for Lloyd to make an art if he is not obliged to keep it on the page, if he has
probably
that freedom to choose it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and talking about your books, your other Eisner-winning work is The Immortal Iron Fist. And on my first reading, I've noticed kung fu fight scenes to be damn good. And
Oh.
later I found out that you work with martial arts consultant Brett Gallickson. How does this
Oh, wait,
realism?
No, I don't know what that is. I don't know who that is. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Well,
you
that's what I read in the article. So,
yeah.
but
Who knows?
kung
Oh.
fu scenes are still
Yeah,
good.
no, I just made all that stuff up.
Well, we need to check with that source.
Yeah, or maybe he worked on the show. I don't know. But in the book, it was just me and Ed making stuff up.
Oh yeah. Well, it's great martial arts there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was at one point a red belt in Taekwondo, but this is all kind of made up comic book kung fu, you know.
Oh yeah.
Oh, you did Taekwondo?
Yeah, not well, but yeah, it was a gentleman's red belt. Wasn't a
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not like Joe Rogan, but yeah, fine.
yeah. But yeah, no, all that really just came from being a fan of kung fu movies and stuff.
Yeah.
It's just always easier when you can make it up.
Did you maybe watch Shang-Chi? The movie.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's also influenced by kung fu movies as well. And I really expected to see the Iron Fist in that movie and Kun Lun, but we didn't saw it. And
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
golden opportunity.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I like that a lot. I like that one a lot.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
yeah.
it was pretty solid movie to me, but nothing special.
It was
I don't know, man.
It was
Oh, sorry.
it was a phenomenal action film, but I thought when people were saying that it's kind of a groundbreaking for Marvel, I was like, no, it's not. No, it's not. You know, and they kind of marketed weirdly to me.
Chinese friends, Asian American friends who, little things like him taking his shoes off before he goes into the things like that, like seeing cultural representation. I know was really big to a lot of people that I know and spoke to, but I was really impressed by how each of the kind of big kind of fight scene set pieces felt so different from the other. It really felt like a kind of introduction to the various different styles of kung fu movie, whether it's like wuxia, fantasy, or your kind of Ong Bak or the Raid. It spanned all kinds of. Here's a more of a Jackie Chan number, and here's this, and here's that, all that kind of stuff. I thought it was a pretty great introduction to kung fu movies.
I'll give it one thing. I have after it a little bit more faith that you can do Dragon Ball live action film.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And look, I got Tony Leung working again, who had functionally retired. So anything that gets Tony Leung on screens, I'm 100% there for.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Luca mentioned Dragon. You have something to say?
Oh, I talking with some friends at the studio side of things who told me that like Tony Leung would interpret like all of his combat moves had an actorly decision. Every punch, every kick, the style of it meant, what am I saying? He talked about Tony's process as an actor and as a physical martial artist, and like the difference between punching someone in anger and punching someone in defense, and what this kick means versus that, and how kind of he really worked with the physicality, which is it never occurred to me that was possible, but that there was a different kind of punch would mean a different thing, but a little bit of fun trivia, I guess. Sorry.
Yeah, certainly. Because I mean, Mandarin versus his wife in the movie, that's I think one of the best fight scenes in whole Marvel Cinematic Universe, in my opinion.
Yeah. No,
I actually
and
think
it's a love story,
Yeah.
It's a meet
And
cute. It's a Howard Hawks movie.
Yeah. But I actually don't like it because I like the action not to have that so choreographed dance with it. But it's okay.
Right. But that was all about choreography. That was all about a dance. Yeah, that was a dance. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
I just
And-
watched Old Boy again. Have you ever seen
No,
it?
that wasn't a dance.
No.
I haven't.
No. You should treat yourself to Old Boy this holiday season. But especially as a fan of the Daredevil show,
Check it out.
you'll love Old Boy was responsible for
Yeah.
a lot of a lot of Daredevil in a lot of ways.
Every scene fight filmed in the hallway after 2003, if I'm correct, that's when it came out.
Yeah.
Was inspired by that. So
Yeah.
you know.
And I love that, every season
Yeah.
of Daredevil there was another. All right, the first one's the hallway. The second one, we're going down the building, the stairs in the building. Like they kept topping themselves with what's our oneer fight this
Yeah.
season, But it kind of started
Yeah.
with this set piece in Old Boy.
You can check our video with Chris Brewster. He was stunt coordinator in the series, and
Ooh.
he came up with the hallway scenes, and he spoke about that particular shooting of Wanners and similar.
Yeah, it's great. I'll check it out.
Tell me this. We spoke a little bit about your collaboration with Taya before. Can we expect to see something fresh, something new in the near future from two of you?
I don't know in the near future, but we're always talking about it. We're always dancing around it. We're looking for the right thing.
Right.
Fingers crossed. I'll write for him anytime, any place, anywhere.
Great. I'm looking forward to that. And the latest we saw from you is Monarch, which you mentioned, Legacy of Monsters, which is
Yeah.
Godzilla TV series in the Monsterverse. And you served there as a writer, and you wrote Da Vinci's Demons before, but this is like the next step, right?
Yeah.
How you were approached to this project?
How was I approached to do it, or what was my approach?
Both.
Okay. I had a deal with my wife and I had what was called an overall deal with Legendary, where they were gonna, where we worked on turning some of our comics into other media, whether TV or movies, and Legendary has a quite big toy box. And I asked about it, and that was in 2018. So it was 5 years practically door to door, from the minute we started developing the show to the minute it actually started to come out, came out. And the approach the approach was to not tell a TV sized version of the Monsterverse films, but to try and make a television show set in that world. I believe that those movies are so huge and they're so spectacular, and like movies themselves are like events. You buy a ticket, you leave your house, you go see it in a big theater full of people in a big crowd. Movies are always better in a big crowd, and you watch it on the biggest, loudest screen possible. But TV is a thing you invite into your home, and I think for you to invite something into your home, it's got to be about characters, So we wanted to Chris Black, the co-creator of the show with me, and we wanted to make a show about what it's like to live in that world where no one is wondering, is Godzilla real anymore? Everyone knows it's real, and it's just a fact of life we have to deal with. And then the challenge became to create compelling characters that we were interested in and wanted to know more about.
Yeah. It's I watched until fifth episode, which was the latest at the time, and I loved how you represented the human aspect, like you are talking about right now, in this big monster spectacle. Because in these action-packed movies and series, in this case, like Godzilla, like Transformers, they are. The humans in that part of storytelling is the weakest part, and you did it great. It reminded me of some manga storylines like Kaiju #8, which is one of the best mangas currently. And how did you manage to make human story compelling when everybody in this time wants to geek out when they see Godzilla finally?
Right. Well, I think the thing is that we wanted to geek out when we see Godzilla finally too, which was the thing.
Yeah.
And what we realized was sort of you know, we're a generously budgeted show. But so we knew that when the big guys show up, it's got to stand shoulder to shoulder with the MonsterVerse films. But we couldn't just have the monsters all the time, right? So it really just became about creating these characters that were, you know, it was, we put it, you know, this is a story about this brother and sister that are trying to figure out who their dad was, and the giant monsters keep getting in the way. And the best time to deploy a giant monster in our show is right when someone is about to get something that they really want. You know, right when they're close to the thing that they've been looking for, that's a great time to have something huge pop up from underground and terrify them.
Or under ice.
Yeah, exactly, you know. But yeah, it was, you know, the monsters in our story are human as often as they are Titan, you know.
There are no rules but one. Drink Jägermeister at minus 18 degrees Celsius.
So how different is to write a script for TV series and to write for comics? Is there essential difference, or you have the same kind of process?
Yeah, there are definitely essential differences, but so much of, you know, in comics, space is time, and in, you know, TV, time is time. You know, my first experience of writing something that was filmed, you know, was for Da Vinci's Demons, and my memory of watching the show as it was broadcast was how overwritten what I had done was, and how jam-packed it was that no moments had a chance to land or breathe. Didn't feel like the characters had time to listen to one another, let alone say everything that I was trying to shove into their mouths, right? So I had this kind of coming into it again, like on this understanding that, like, don't try to don't be clever, don't be cute, don't you know, let moments breathe and hang and all that stuff. And like, look, I had, you know, Chris has worked in television his entire career, knows what he's doing. But it's sort of, but it's fundamentally that's sort of what's the least that I can write. It's very collaborative, right? Like knowing that, leaving things for the actors to do, you know, that was huge, right? Like letting the act, you know, leaving things for directors, and rather not trying to control an art direct from the page and all that kind of stuff. But it was similar enough that I didn't feel too much of a learning curve. You know, it was the same things that vex me and challenge me about writing comics vexed me and challenged me about writing for television.
We are jumping from a team to team a little bit. Don't mind me, but
All
right. Your storylines are coming to life on screen from comics, and Fear itself, which we mentioned, is one of the big crossovers, one of the important events in Marvel Comics. Do you think it will get adapted maybe in the next saga or something? Do you see that story on the big screen or small screens?
You know, I think that I don't, but I think part of it is that sort of that kind of end beat of was sort of in Endgame, you know, with Cap with the hammer and
With the hammer, yeah.
You know what I mean? So it feels like it already has been in a way. You know, the most important part has already been there, you know. So I can die happy, you know.
Also, which one would you like to see the most on the screen? Which of your storylines?
Of like Marvel stuff, you mean?
Any stuff.
Well, let's say Sex Criminals then. Sex Criminals is we've been working on that for a while, so I get good feelings about Sex Criminals. Let's say Sex Criminals for now.
And now, because I haven't read it, but I know it's regarded highly regarded. How would you hook me up to go and read Sex Criminals?
I'll just send you copies. You mean like how would I You mean like
Pitch
how would
it.
I like sell it to you? Pitch it? It's a
Yeah.
sex comedy. It's a comedy of like a comedy about sex, about it's a love story full of the filthiest jokes you've ever read. It's about a young woman who, when she experiences orgasm, freezes time. And so in this moment when she should feel as close to someone else as one can feel, sex makes her feel incredibly disconnected and lonely and distant from the world. And then one day she hooks up with a guy who can do the same thing. And together in this world of frozen time, they do what any of us would do. They fall in love and start to rob banks.
I'm hooked. But
There you go.
Yeah, that's the thing.
also send me copies because I will
Sure,
pirate it.
yeah. Send me
Pirate it
address.
anyway.
Yeah.
You
I'll send
have
what
it.
I
I
got.
mean.
Yeah, but that's also a thing about comic books that unfortunately it hasn't been translated. A lot of superhero stuff has been adapted, but other comic book stuff genres didn't have the time to shine. You know, like a lot of detective stuff and maybe some fantasy, sci-fi in a different non-superhero way.
Mhm.
And I wanted to also ask you, maybe it's like a jumping from subject to subject a little bit,
All good.
but maybe a final for me, because I'm currently reading your Iron Man, and uh, Iron Man is a character that's always been is also as interesting because and Stanley said it. You this is the character that no one creating a character that perhaps you shouldn't like, but you end up liking it. And I think it's, well, for me at least, I like Iron Man because I think everybody has a little bit of that ego and arrogance in us that they want to kind of show off a little bit, but we don't have that maybe confidence. Uh, and on that note, do you think that maybe Iron Man is or that kind of characters are maybe a little bit more difficult to write because the personality doesn't fit that pattern of this is what people will like and this is what people will not like.
Well, I think kind of the genius of both casting Robert Downey Jr. and the genius of Robert Downey Jr. is he is immensely likable while also being a huge dick. You know?
Yeah.
So like that's the trick, right? And that's really interesting. I think it's certainly the challenge. I think for me it was the man was just as important in the iron as the iron in the title. You know what I mean? It was as
Yeah,
much
you
about
have
the
him
guy.
going to AA meetings.
Yeah. It was, as much about the guy in the suit as it was the suit. And like I'm an alcoholic and drug addict in recovery, and Tony Stark was as well. And so it was a chance to kind of that's a guy who's deeply in touch with his own flaws and aware of his worst tendencies, which is really compelling. Like when you know the mistakes you're making as you're making them, but you make them anyway. Like that's inherently dramatic. There's an inherent conflict there. And the idea of him being this kind of test pilot of being this kind of mad inventor who wanted to that Howard Hughes type of like, I'm going to invent the fastest plane in the world and then I'm going to fly it.
Yeah.
There's a kind of interesting compulsion there, right? But I think when it's done well, it's kind of exactly what our DJ did. Is like, God, you're a dick, but I can't stop watching you.
Yeah.
But something about storytelling is this right that writers want to put every and each one of their ideas in their first one? Is that was that the case with you?
Not all of my ideas, but like I know that the first thing I did for Marvel, I certainly tried to cram as many cameos as possible into it. Because it was like if it never happens again. So like it was like a Wolverine short story. It's like a 10-page Wolverine short story. but like I tried to get Nick Fury in there and Spider-Man and like the helicarrier, like just everything, every toy I ever wanted to touch, I tried to cram into the short story specifically because like, what if it never happens again? And that's the thing I think you can see when people show up at Marvel, you can see that instinct. Like everybody wants to crash a helicarrier, everyone wants to have Spider-Man show up. You know, it's a thing that we all share, that the stuff we all love about being in that playground. You want to touch your favorite toys right away, regardless of how appropriate it is.
Yeah, and I think that Marvel Studios is exploiting that cameo part of their movies right now, because we all
right. That's very it's yeah. I think it's yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
because everybody, even if movie is bad, like the Marvels isn't the best movie in my opinion, not even the good one. Unfortunately, I would love if the movie was good, but wasn't. But when the Blu-ray version comes out, or when it gets to be streamed on Disney Plus, everybody will talk about the cameos and who showed in the post-credit scene, right?
I guess, yeah. It's funny. Like I actually I think that movie got unfairly maligned. I think that a lot of the kind of issues of fatigue, like I that had been sort of bubbling up, the last few years from like Doctor Strange and Thor and Quantumania and everything. Like I thought that movie kind of addressed. Like I thought it was kind of a kind of perfect self-contained story. Like there's something very Bill Mantlo, and like the idea of like, oh my God, all of our powers are swapped. Right. That's a classic like Steve Englehart kind of story or whatever. So yeah, I think that movie I think it was funny. I think it was fun, and yeah, I think that like I thought Marvel's got and look, I clearly got a horse in the race here, but yeah, that movie got I thought that got a unfair yeah, I don't think the movie I've read people talking about is not the movie that I saw, right? So but your mileage may vary.
Yeah, I have the same thing about Eternals, because Eternals is also backlashed after its release, and it was considered to be bad, but I loved it.
Huh.
And,
Right, yeah, interesting.
And about Marvels, it's like there's too much chaos. They do not manage to control, basically. In my
Yeah, it was
opinion.
very it's certainly it was very very that's certainly true by design, I think, right?
Yeah, probably.
But whether that works for you or not. But like I love that it wasn't about the end of the world again and all the that it was just this thing about, oh my God, our powers are scrambling, we got to figure it out, and I thought the three of them were great together. I thought like Brie Larson was great. Iman was amazing.
Yeah,
and
best
just like
part
it
for
was
me.
yeah, right. Just every time she opened her mouth, she's like, oh, she's so great, and like letting Brie Larson be fun, the jump where they're learning to jump, her eyes going. Brie Larson does this thing where her eyes increase like 200% in size. It's my favorite special effect in the movie, is just a thing that Brie Larson does when she's surprised by things, and I thought it was I thought it was like, oh, that feels like what these movies should be, is a little more self-contained, a little more less like homework, but I think that was the problem, whether it was marketing it as the Marvels rather than Captain Marvel 2. Maybe people felt like, oh wait, I didn't see Miss Marvel, or I don't remember, I haven't seen WandaVision since it came out. Maybe it was I don't know, but it felt like, oh no, this should just be about these characters getting together and solving a problem is pretty great for me.
Also, your wife is also a comic book writer, and she also adapts manga to English language. So I assume you are familiar with manga world and with whole thing about that. So have you maybe got your hands on some of the manga to read them, and what do you think about manga style?
You know, I can't I don't I can't it's pretty limited. Yes, I have, but it's pretty limited, and I suspect pretty basic. And honestly, my favorite guy is Taiyo Matsumoto, who just does these like black and white or Tekkon Kincrete, and number 5, and I love oh shit, the guy that did Pluto
I don't know.
in Monster.
I know the manga, but I can't remember who wrote it. The name.
Can't see his stuff. Anyway, yeah, so a little, but I've not read a ton of manga, and I love Otomo's stuff and Osamu Tezuka's stuff, and the other thing is just like, where do you keep it? There's just so much of it.
Yeah.
Talk about the volumes.
Yeah.
Catching up to One Piece is a hell of a job.
Yeah,
I must brag that
exactly.
I did it.
Yeah, or yeah, it can be a huge undertaking, but yeah, no, it's a great world, and I was in Japan shooting Monarch, and went and bought some Tankuban, in Japanese, just to like, it's just such an amazing, just to sit down and see all the different styles and all the different flavors of things that no idea existed,
Yeah, and they just released their Godzilla -1.
It's so good. Have you seen it?
No, not yet. No, it
So
wasn't in
good.
our cinema.
So good. And they're gonna put it back out in January
In
in black and white. Yeah, it's so good.
Yeah. I can't wait to see it, but not soon, I
Not
suppose.
soon, I suppose, here, but
Yeah,
we'll
yeah.
see it definitely.
Matt, I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as we did.
This was fantastic. Thank you for your patience with me too. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for your time. And but
Yeah,
before
my
before we wrap up, we have a little tradition where we say a quote on our Montenegrin language and translate it to English. And I've chosen quote from our writer. He's some kind of fantasy sci-fi, only sci-fi writer we have currently. He's guest, Čedo Vuković, and it's more credo than a quote. And he said on our language, disati čojstvom znači postojati. I hope you will have a lovely afternoon.
Yeah, you too have a great holiday, and thank you so much for having me.
We stay genuine, uncensored, and unscripted, and we always will, as we have to order our usual. Share us and subscribe us, and stay tuned until the next Wednesday. IKUZO!